Welcome to Local Voices, a community podcast produced by the Echo newspaper, which takes a deep dive into the news that matters the most to you. I'm your host, Hayden Moore. Recently in the media, there's been plenty said about the difficulties young people living in Ireland are facing, from the high rate of unemployment to access to education and housing. So this week, I'm holding a virtual roundtable discussion about those three issues, with three young people from the locality who are involved in politics about how they are being impacted and what changes could be made. Let's meet our guests. Adam Smyth, Chairperson of Dublin Southwest Ógra Fianna Fáil. Thanks for joining us.
How are you? Thank you.
Vanessa Mulhall, Tallaght South Representative for the Green Party and Dublin South Greens Chairperson. Thanks for your time.
Thanks for having me.
And John Kerr, Social Democrats Dublin Southwest Chairperson. Great to have you on.
Hi Hayden, thanks for having me.
There's three topics that I want to discuss with you, but first I kind of want to ask you just about how you got into politics, I suppose. And John, I'll start with yourself. Why did you get involved in politics? And I suppose as well, like, what do you kind of think about youth engagement in politics and activism?
Sure. I'll address the first part of that first. I'd always been kind of interested in politics, and then I suppose the first political engagement that I really had was canvassing for repeal. And I on that canvas, the Dublin Southwest Together for Yes canvasses were coordinated by Carly Bailey, who is our councillor for the area. And through her, I kind of found out about the party and its work in the area and nationally. And I knew then I'd found a home. So that's been me now for the last kind of 3 or 4 years, has kind of been learning more about the party, working on engaging in the area.
Wow. Okay. Right. I suppose generally, what do you think about the levels of young people getting involved?
Sorry. Yeah. No. The second part of the question, regarding youth engagement, I think it's a really interesting time as a young person to be getting involved in politics. I think a lot of people are realizing that the way things have been run traditionally in this country has been, very much, you'll get your turn when you've done the grunt work and everything. I think and when when you're allowed, it's your turn kind of thing. And I think we as young people have kind of started to stop and say, no, we've had enough, we want change in this country. So it's been great since the general election. Our membership has gone through the roof. We've gotten about 40-50 new members, all kind of quite young, and all kind of after the general election result wanting to see proper change in this country.
Yeah, it seemed like after the generals that everyone was joining the Soc Dems for a while there. It was like some cultural movement it was.
Long may it last.
Adam, what about yourself? What got you involved in politics, and what do you think about the levels of young people getting involved?
So I grew up with a family. We were all involved in politics, but kind of locally, I did only kind of really get involved properly in the last couple of years since the local elections. I've always kind of gone out and helped with Councillor Charlie O'Connor. I always believe he's just very community based. He's always there to listen to people in the community, and that kind of brought me in, saying it's not just there to look at national issues and to decide planning permission, but it's there to listen to people and to help people with whatever their needs are in the local area. And that really kind of brought me onto it. The youth engagement in it, I think it, as John said, in the last year and a half has very much gone up quite a lot, which I think is great. I think young people do need to come out and say, this is what we want to do, this is what it is, in whatever sense it is. It is very important. I think it is growing, and I think it is going to grow a lot more, and it's great to see it growing, especially out here in Dublin South West, and in the different areas.
Right. And Vanessa, what do you think? What do you think about the numbers of young people involved in politics today and activism? And I suppose what made you get involved?
So I kind of been involved in politics since secondary school. The way I kind of look at politics is I always kind of say like the personal is a bit political. And some people say like small p and big P, but I think like when like life kind of, everything that happens kind of like social issues are political, and I think that's how I look at it. Right. I think from a young age I was involved like in youth services and youth work, and I think that kind of opened my eyes an awful lot to like the inequalities and stuff that are out there. And then I went to Maynooth to study community and youth work, And like there's a lot of like social issues and stuff involved in that course. And I think that's just what kind of like opened my kind of eyes to the world of politics. And I think on the whole youth engagement aspect of it, I think young people are like really keen to be involved because they can see firsthand the issues like they're facing it. They just see it in their communities, and young people have a voice, and I think they want to hear it now more than ever. And I think it's that whole thing, like we're here and we need to be heard. Like, and I think there is more engagement with young people within political parties also.
I was actually just can't my head there. What do you think about lowering the voter age? I know it's in the news a lot this week, actually, about lowering the voter age to 16. Do you think that would improve people's interest maybe in politics, Vanessa?
Yeah, I think so. Like I remember being in the Shannon when they were debating it back in 2017 and 2018. And I remember just sitting there and being like, I wasn't even like under the age at the time, but like it just felt like such a kick in the stomach, like when, you know, other parties were saying, oh, they're not mature enough, or they're not old enough, or they won't get out and vote. And it's just like, you know, we can't just have that mindset. So I do think it really is needed. Yeah,
John, what's your thoughts?
Yeah, kind of just I was about to chip in there in terms of what I think is really interesting is that the landscape has changed in the last 15 or 20 years, but especially in the last 2 or 3. I think that younger people have so much more access to politics these days. I think there's still so much more work that needs to be done to make politics fully accessible to people our age. And I think lowering the voting age is only one of kind of a bigger picture kind of investment that needs to be made in youth political engagement. But I think a lot of the arguments against lowering the voting age, with, you know, as Vanessa mentioned, with regards to maturity or with regards to kind of understanding, I think because technological literacy is so high among young people, often we're finding stuff out first because we're there first when the news breaks on Twitter, or you know, we follow our local representatives and we get the word straight out from them first. So I think that actually young people are among the most engaged in politics. I think the work that we need to start doing now is making it easier for young people to vote, and making the registration process for easier, not just for people under 18, but even for young people, you know, from 18 to 25, making voter registration an easy and simple thing to do. I think is really important as well, because even in our own constituency, the registration rates for voting, especially in certain areas of the constituency, could be far higher, and you have to wonder why that investment hasn't been made by governments before, and why that push has been made to enfranchise people further, you know.
Yeah, even like when you say about the people registering to vote, I had a pain in my face registering to vote. Like, just I think when I registered, I was too late. I was past the deadline, but they had extended it a little bit. There was like a window, so I was on like a temporary register. But now I have to go and reapply to. Again. Yeah, that's just like that's very prohibitive for people.
Yeah, at best, it's poor administrative skills, which, you know, is nothing new in how Irish politics has historically been run. At worst, it's a purposeful disenfranchisement of people who want to change from the old guard of Fine Gael, Fianna Fáil governments. You know.
Yeah, Adam, I'll bring you in. What do you think?
I do fully agree. If we should look at bringing the voting age down to 16, I think would be very good for this country to be able to say that it is younger, that we're listening to young people. I think that is very important. But on the other side of it, we need to look at, as John was saying, how the voting register is done. Going into schools, talking to people of that age bracket on a neutral basis, and showing them how to vote, helping people vote, using different youth organisations and that sort of stuff. But then also teaching of the politics, having the politics modules in schools, maybe during transition year, that sort of stuff, and actually showing what politics is and explaining the different things. But it would have to be done on a neutral level. But I do think it's something that is very important, is that education of what we are voting for, and what's going to happen from that vote.
Right. Okay. We'll get into today's topic. So I know we went on a bit of a tangent there. I spoke to Jonathan Doyle this week. He's the CEO of Citywise Education, and he was telling me that in the last census, 2016, 29% of people from Tallaght went on to third level education, and that if you looked at, this is actually a quote, if you looked at Jobstown and Brookfield, it's only 5% of people who hold a degree. And I want to start with, I want to ask the three of you this question, but I'll start with yourself, Adam, because I know you're obviously from the area, like where you're a Fettercairn or whatever. But what do you see as the biggest obstacles for people from disadvantaged communities accessing education, and kind of is there any solutions to that really?
There's definitely disadvantages. The cost is a big disadvantage. Minimum of €3,000 per year. I know myself, it's €3,000 per year, but then straight off in first year there was another €1,000 worth of equipment and uniforms and stuff I had to buy for. And for people living in disadvantaged areas, that's very difficult to be able to fork that out straight off, and not everyone gets the grants. So I definitely think the cost is one of the biggest barriers. The other point of the education that I think needs to be looked at, and statistics as well, let's bring up apprenticeships is something that's very big in this area, I think, as well. I think we need to highlight that doing an apprenticeship isn't bad. It should be just as good as doing your college course. It should be just as seen as good as doing your college course, and looked at in that sense. We need to look at that, but then also look at and talk and see why people aren't going to college. What is the reasons? But then also, how many people are going back to college afterwards? Like, I know my dad, he left school very young, but he didn't go back to college till he was 35. I think that's that story, and that people right across the country, especially in disadvantaged areas, people are working for a couple of years before going to college, and looking at why people are choosing that route rather than just going straight into education.
Yeah, Vanessa, just something else actually that Jonathan's pointed out to me when I was speaking to him was that the dropout rate is quite high for people in the area too. So what's your take on education and the obstacles that people face?
So I think what Adam said there, a lot of that is like I would agree. There is a lot of disadvantages. I think one of the main things that I think is I think we need to look more at career guidance and skills. And like I remember when I was in school, like you had to book your appointments and like to go and see your career guidance teacher, but you kind of had to have the ideas in your head about what you wanted to do. Where I think that if that kind of started earlier on in your time in secondary school, and you had more of them discussions, and people were more kind of informed of the options, like as was said already, school or colleges and everything, like I do think that apprenticeships and internships need to have a lot more value, and then I think there's the other kind of payment for internships and apprenticeships, and that also needs to be looked at as well, because people are given their time. And I think also like the education around like grants, and I think like helping people and enabling them to fill them out themselves, but also kind of like encouraging them and showing them how is massive.
John, I want to bring you in on this. I know obviously we've heard cost has been mentioned there, and maybe alternative routes into college, like apprenticeships and internships as well, or whatever. Like what like how do you actually implement those things? Because like I'm from the area myself. I'm from Brookfield, Springfield area in Tallaght, and like I definitely did not want to go to college, and I know like loads of people in the area kind of have that feeling as well. Like, how do you kind of flip that switch in young people to make them even want to go?
Well, to be perfectly frank, kind of starting off, I don't think the onus should be on young people. I think the onus should be on the education system and the state to make it as easy as possible and as appealing as possible for young people to engage with education. And there's kind of, looking at the kind of the system, there's things both the kind of primary and secondary, and then there's, I think, kind of tertiary education, which I think is a kind of a different issue depending on how you look at employment and such. But focusing on primary and secondary, you're looking at things, as Adam said, cost, but you're also looking at issues that we've been talking about for 15, 20, 30 years. I went to St. Columkills in Knockline, biggest primary school in the country, 7 classes of 32. And what you can't blame young people in a school of over 2,000 people, if they're feeling like they're not getting heard, if they're struggling and their teacher doesn't have the time or energy or resources to properly invest in their education, of course they're going to not want to engage with school fully, because the school isn't engaging fully with them. Teachers and educators are doing the best they can to engage with these children, but without the proper resources, without appropriate class sizes, they're already struggling. You look as well then at the how formal or education structures are. You look at the amount of children who may have different developmental or mental health needs, and may not fit in the traditional educational environment, but the options just aren't there for them to continue to engage. And the reason to stay in school and the kind of the encouragement for going on to college isn't there from either from the state, and it's not being communicated to people locally. I mean, logically, anybody living in our constituency could tell you, oh well, obviously if I stay in school and go to college, I'll have, I'll get a better job, etc., etc. But like on a daily basis, it doesn't work like that. We need to make learning a positive experience for young people, not something that feels like an onus and a burden to them, and not a wilderness that they can feel lost in. So I think what we have to do in that regard is, I think we have to keep the promises that TDs have been making to their constituents for about 30 years and actually start decreasing class sizes, actually start, developing alternative routes to education. Then on the college level, I agree completely with the need for more apprenticeships and the need for less conventional routes towards employment and, kind of job satisfaction. But I think as well as that, I think we need to explore. I think we need to explore and expand the options that people have. I think apprenticeships are fine if you're that way inclined. We need to fund the arts more. We need to make that an appealing and realistic option for young people who find that the arts might be their strength. We need to make we need to expand kind of the subjects that children have aspects to in school, and make sure that whatever a child's strength is, that it's being found. And I think at the end of the day, it's not as simple as saying, oh, the kids should go to school more. The schools and the Department of Education and the state have to go to children more. They have to go towards children's needs more. And that's not to blame anybody individually within the system, but this system has needed change since all of us were in nappies, and probably since our parents were in nappies. But I think we're looking at the kind of radical development in restructuring our education system to suit the needs of kind of people in general that we have since free secondary education was introduced. So I really do think that we need to kind of comprehensively address that rather than looking at making individual tweaks.
How would you implement something like that? Would it just be a massive like overhaul in terms of government funding and like just putting more money aside in things like the budget?
Well, I think that's a start. Yeah. I think there's obviously, in terms of state funding is obviously a really useful option, and I think diversity in state funding is really important as well. It's not enough to say, okay, we're giving 500 million to education this year. You have to look at how that breaks down. What are you investing that 300 million in? Are you giving it? How much of that is going towards private schools versus public schools? Of that's going towards public schools, how much of that is going towards developing a GAA pitch for a school that, and I'm not kind of diminishing sports or anything, but how much of that is going into developing the resources that are needed in schools? Like I know from my my own kind of personal experience, the late Francie Connolly, I don't know if any of you know him, was involved in the primary school in St. Columkills, and he was working about 25 years. So like I think it was built in about 2012, 2013. He'd been working on that since the late 90s. It shouldn't take that long. If the need is there for a school, If the need is there for more resources, you shouldn't be talking a generation to get them.
Yeah.
So urgency, I think, is required in this as well.
Vanessa, I'm eager to know what your take on that is in terms of like, how would you actually go about implementing change? Because I know we can kind of talk about saying, oh, this is the problem, this is the problem, this is the problem, but how do you actually construct a change like that?
Well, it's massive. Like we all know, the education system is massive. But I think another take on it is that, like, I think sometimes you need to look at like the non-formal education sector as well. And like there's a massive like cohort of students and young people that access that space. Like you said that you're speaking to people in Citywise. So like there's Citywise, there's Ógra, and there's all these other youth organizations. And I think like they provide a space for young people. And like they can be very supportive in relation to guidance and supports, and like, you know, talking students through their options and what they need to, you know, what they need to know. But I think that's the crucial point. Like youth workers, like and educators in the non-formal field, they ask young people what they want. Like they ask what they want to do, and they meet their needs there. Whereas I think sometimes in school, you're not necessarily given the time that you need to develop and flourish. And I think, like, even when you look at the options, like what you have, like language wise, or, you know, there's different things that can be looked at. But I think that the main thing does come down to funding and supports and resources for schools. But I think conversations need to happen with students, because like a lot of students go to school and they're like, I hate being here, like I don't want to be here, you know, this is like a chore having to come to school. But I think sometimes, I think in some ways you need to make learning more fun and more engaging, and, you know, just little things like that. I know it's massive, but I think if you kind of chip away at it, it doesn't seem as daunting, I don't think.
Yeah, like incremental improvement essentially. Adam, I want to ask you the same question. Yeah. Like, how would you construct something like this? I know, because we've obviously raised the problems, but what's your take on that?
Yeah, I fully agree that that non-formal route, the way for Ógra Citywise, I was heavily involved, still am heavily involved with Scouting Ireland, and it's something we strive is that non-formal education is still there. It's still education. You're still learning skills that are needed. One of the educational systems I like is the German one, where right from the secondary school you are targeting to a certain side that you are interested in, and it's something that I definitely think we should be taking some advice from, and looking and saying, okay, what's the point in showing someone how to learn 8-9 subjects that they have no interest in, they're not good at, and they're learning it just to pass that exam because they're told they have to pass that exam. I don't think that's beneficial to the students or the teachers trying to teach that to students, where students are just not interested at all. While you have your practical classes, likes of woodwork, I did home ec myself, music, that kind of stuff. People are interested in those subjects as they pass, and majority of the time people do better in those because that's what they're interested in. And looking at that, and then looking at the non-formal and trying to bring it together. I feel like the likes of woodwork and stuff, I feel like it is very non-formal taught. Obviously there is that formal side, the paperwork, all that side, but you're just learning by doing. And I think that's something that I personally believe in quite a lot, is the learning by doing is the way forward for everything. I think the Irish education system, the Department of Education, need to look at that and say, how can we try adapt that in some way a bit more? It's not going to be done overnight, but I definitely think in the next 3-4 years we do need a review of that second level education system.
Okay. Can I ask something there, Hayden?
Yeah, absolutely.
And again, I'm not saying this to score points or to be difficult, but both of you represent parties that are in government. Why isn't this change being talked about in your manifestos? Why isn't Norma Foley shouting this from the rooftops? Or I don't know who the Green representative is for education, but why aren't we hearing this from you guys?
I just know on my side, it is something I find there's a lot of things that Ógra have said, that Ógra have represented, and that we have gone forward. Some of them have gone through, some of them haven't. I know most recently, one of the points that's being brought forward is that the whole side of the mental health, actually having guidance, actually having counsellors available there to students and stuff like that. That is something that Ógra proposed, I think it was last February or even before that, a motion went forward. And we have brought that to the minister, and there is ongoing talks at the moment for stuff like that. But I do feel it does need to be listened to more. Senior parties don't always take on everything the youth wings say, but it is something I think should be looked at more myself.
You can respond there, Vanessa, if you want.
Sorry.
Great,
Yeah.
thanks. I from what my understanding of the Greens is that we want to see more inclusion in the education system. We want to see more equality. We want to see the education system being more diverse and more welcoming to all different backgrounds and being more inclusive to everyone. I think everybody can do better, I think. But I do know that we have been out strong on it, and trying to make the education system better. I know we might not be shouting it from the rooftops, but I suppose internally them conversations do happen. And we by no means thinks it's perfect. I know when you're in school yourself, I remember when I was in first year, they were like, oh, the junior cert. And it's this is meant to be a journey, it's meant to be enjoyable. And then you go into fourth year and fifth year, and it's like, oh, the leaving cert. And it's like, there's always something, So I just think that it needs to be open and inclusive. And I also think that the system and politics needs to appreciate that it's a journey that you're on in education.
I do think that's a very don't apologize. I think that's a very good point though that John brought up, because essentially I'm not too au fait with the manifestos of Fianna Fáil or the Greens coming into this, so let's say that first off. But what is the point of having internal conversations if people don't know that you're having them? You know what I mean? What is the point? I'll ask you that, Vanessa. Just what is the point in having them if there's just people don't know you're having them?
I think the point is that everybody can have a conversation, so I can have a conversation with my local group, and we can talk about education, and we can say what we think is right and what we think is wrong. But in some ways I don't necessarily feel like that needs to be blown up and be put on social media or put, I think if we have, if there's something that we're working on, like a concrete project, and we feel then that needs to be put out in a media statement or whatever, then we can do that. But I think these conversations do happen, and maybe we should be more vocal on them. Perhaps we should, but I think it's all a learning curve, I guess.
Yeah, I'll put that to yourself as well, Adam, because I know you mentioned there that there was a motion put forward by the Ógra. What's the crack with that? Have we heard about that, or are you just having that? Is that a public thing?
Yes. So the one about the emotional counselling and that side, it's very public. It is on our social medias ourselves. Within the Ógra page, I know Shauna herself has done Trojan work at it. She's got elected as our new equality officer as well. And between her and then Christopher O'Sullivan down in Cork have been working on this to try to get meetings, and that has been advertised. I think the other issue, as Vanessa said, the problem with advertising every single conversation you have, people are sitting there saying, well, you had the conversation, why isn't that happening? So I think there is a need for specific times to advertise those conversations. I do think the emotional counsel one was done quite well. The motions are put forward, talks even before the motions, talks are already happening with the minister, with the minister's department and the other TDs who were talking with Norma Foley. I think it's important that those conversations happen, and then as things are kind of moving forward, advertising that we are looking at this, that this is happening, that we're not ignoring it. And especially I think when things happen outside of those conversations that cause those conversations to be advertised a lot more, it does happen a lot more, which I think is a good thing, because it means people are seeing that things are happening while the conversation is being brought up. but I also think we should advertise it slightly a bit better. Do it before the conversation is. Why is it taking a problem, something to happen somewhere in a school or in a community? Why is it taking something bad to happen for the conversation to be publicized, even though the conversation's already been happening for years?
Right, okay. I think I'm satisfied with that now. With that topic, we'll move on. I hope you are as well, John. Good. Though you brought that up, that was good. No, look, we'll move on. This is kind of tying into that as well, into education / employment, I suppose. I'll preface this by saying that the CSO stats for April showed that 61.8% of young people were unemployed. So the ESRI released the findings of a study into minimum wage and how it shaped up against 21 countries around Europe, basically using data from 2017 and 2018. And it showed that Ireland had the highest educated workforce, and at 46%, Ireland also had the highest percentage of highly educated minimum wage employees. I had to read that 3 or 4 times to actually wrap my head around that. John, I want to ask you first on this. Do you think this would illustrate that there is a severe lack of opportunity for young people exiting the education system?
Absolutely, Hayden. And I think actually, even before we get into that, you mentioned the minimum wage here. We need to start paying young people a living wage. Like, you look at the national minimum wage is, I think, €10 an hour, and that's after 2 years of full employment. So you have young people doing cheap labor, essentially being paid 4 or 5 quid less an hour, which amounts to 30 or 40 quid less a day, and then so much per week, per month, etc. So I think young people are currently exploited in the workforce, and I think that needs to change. But in terms of your question regarding kind of a lack of opportunity for young people in the workforce, I think that's absolutely an issue. I know even in my own career area, I work as an assistant psychologist currently. So I'm kind of on my way to hopefully one day becoming a clinical psychologist. I have to get an undergrad and a master's for that, and still jobs are being advertised. Well, I say jobs, posts are being advertised for 20 hours, voluntary contracts, zero pay, and you're wondering why people, there's a dialogue that I've seen a lot of recently, which is, young people on the pandemic payment, they're just sitting there and taking the money. And I say, well, if it's a question of getting 300 quid a week or getting €0 to do labor that will be completely unrewarded, I don't blame people for trying to kind of cover their own living costs. But I think that there's so many issues to accessing workforce. I think a part of that, again, it comes down to diversity in investing. It comes down to the fact that for whatever reason, our government is focused on investing in and kind of buddying up with large corporations and large multinational companies. We need to invest in local businesses a lot more. We need to invest in local communities a lot more. We've talked already about education and apprenticeships and kind of different things that you can do from school. We need to move past the Apple and the Facebook jobs, and we need to also start looking at for people who, for whatever reason, can't or don't want to go down that route. We need to have different opportunities than the kind of the standard corporate jobs that are being offered to people. And there's not enough of those jobs being offered either. And there's definitely not enough of those jobs that are being offered at a fair wage. So I think we as a state need to be a lot stricter on the working rights of young people. We need to be far more stringent in upholding those rights when they're crossed, and we need to be far more proactive and far braver in investing in our local communities, rather than leaving it up for a select few at the top to kind of dictate how the jobs of our entire workforce is created.
Okay. Right, Vanessa, just to ask you, just based on that study, when you hear about, like, we're obviously after been talking about education, and if you do get to pursue third level education and you're hearing about, there's no real opportunity on the other side of that, why would you bother even go to college, I suppose? So it's like this circular thing, I suppose. But like, what are your thoughts on the study?
I think it's devastating. Like, really. So, like, when I finished school, I went on and done a PLC. But from that year, from transitioning from sixth year to that year in a PLC, I couldn't get a job. Like, as much as I tried, I couldn't get a job. And then I went then to my first year in college, and there wasn't a job. Like, you're applying for jobs, and there was one. I was getting emails back saying, oh, you need like 2 or 3 years experience, and it's like, sorry, no, like, what?
We're there just with babysitting on our CV.
Yeah. It's like, how do you expect me to have that experience? And like, that's still happening today. And I just think it's really is disheartening. Like, I done a lot of work with the National Youth Council on a voluntary level, and we spoke about this, like, how to get young people into the workforce. And really, I think it's just about changing the mindset of like employers, basically. And I think it's a lot about, like, taking that chance on young people. Like, young people, like, show that they are ready, motivated, and they want money. Like, they want money because they want to be able to go out and buy themselves things, or save for college, or just live, basically. Like, I was lucky then when I was in second year of school, or second year of college. I got a job in Super Value. In Knockline I worked, and like, so many people that are students, work there, but they work there like throughout their whole time in college. And then if they happen to get then to get like a job out of their degree or whatever, then they move on. But it's a job that's kind of like a safety net. And I'm not dissing retail workers at all. Like, I think they're great out there. It's an amazing job to have. But I do think it's a lot about changing and shifting that mindset, because we've proven that we want to work. And yeah, I looked at that study as well before coming on to see what the unemployment figures were like. And I don't know if a lot of that is it probably is because of COVID, as a lot of people were out of work. Yeah,
they did reference COVID actually in the report.
Yeah, I feel like a lot of things are being blamed on COVID lately. But I think we need to look at, like, post-COVID and, getting people back out there. Yeah.
Well, I suppose, like, when you look at the ESRI findings, where they show about Ireland being having the highest percentage of highly educated minimum wage employees, like, that is just frightening when you actually think about it. And there's a song, actually, I don't know if you're familiar with the Drimna-based artist Finch. He's a rapper. He has a song called "Like Me," and there's a line that sticks out to me, and it's always stuck out in my head since I heard it. And he says, "I'm the underqualified qualified man," and like, that is, I'm sure that resonated with the three of you as well, because that's a line that I'm sure resonated with thousands of people who've listened to the song. And like, how many young people do we know that go to college only to be like left in the lurch, essentially, on the other side of it, with little hope of getting the job, or like working, like, as you mentioned there, for free, essentially, just to try get a space in the industry for yourself, or there's just nothing out there. Adam, to ask you, like, what are you supposed to do?
It's a very good question. I think it is a big issue. Like, I know myself, I'm after spending 3 years in college studying to be a baker. Now, luckily, I got a job there a couple of weeks ago, but because I had to do it for college placement, and I am being kept on, luckily. But I'm after doing 3 years in college, and I'm earning €10, just over €10 an hour, doing 40 hours a week. And you're sitting there looking and saying, I've been trying to get a job in a bakery for the last 3 years, but as Vanessa said, oh, you need 2 years experience, you need 3 years minimum, 3 years, 5 years experience. And how are young people meant to get a break into the industry, except for the one time your college tells you have to get placement, and your employer takes you on because it's for college placement, and they know, oh, well, this is a 12-week contract, that's all we have to keep them for. And I think that is something that does need to be changed. talking with the big industries, as John said, Apple, Microsoft, those type of industries, where yes, they're quite big in the countries. They do take on a lot of jobs, but to try to get into them is a young person's not going to get their break in there. But then also looking at local places, looking at small businesses, and trying to help those local people. I know Ógra Fianna Fáil did a campaign at Christmas about the shop local and that, and they're saying for every euro spent in your local community, 50% actually gets put back into the community, and the money's constantly spent going there. I think it is important that we do take that away from just the shopping, supporting local businesses of industry, say web developers, different computer software companies, looking at local ones and looking at Irish generated ones and trying to use them more, because they're the people who are actually taking on jobs in Ireland for young people as well. They're a lot more accepting to young people taking the jobs on. But again, we do need to look at even the big national ones, because there are millions of jobs coming from the big multinational companies, and trying to work with them to accept and take on younger people as well. Because as I said, like 61.8% unemployment. How many of them have been in recent years have been working in the hospitality industry while sitting there with a college degree in something completely different, but they just can't get a job because they need that 2 years experience before they'll be hired.
Right. Yeah, I'm coming to a head with this. I'm going to ask you all a bigger question towards the end of this, after we go through the three topics. So I'm just going to move on quickly to housing, if you don't mind, as I'm conscious of the time as well. Back to the trusty statistics on this one. Just over a year ago, the OECD Affordable Housing Database showed that 77% of young adults were still living with their parents. And I think that was from ages 18 to 29. I failed to take that down, so don't quote me on that part. But still, that statistic, the 77% is quite high. Young people are finding themselves basically locked out of the market and unable to afford a mortgage and stuck in this renting loop, or at least that's what people are saying. And there's an article in the Irish Independent on the day that we're recording this podcast, and it states that 53 million euro is being spent by cuckoo funds week after week buying up homes. John, I want to ask you about this. You're hearing about the demand and the supply not meeting it, but how are young people supposed to even compete in this environment?
Well, that's the thing. They can't, Hayden. You know, you look at it, you look at the situation at the moment. We're hearing again, for Fianna Fáil, for example, are putting forward this shared equity scheme, which basically trusts that the market will solve the problem. This is the same market that completely destroyed our prospects 10 years ago and completely derailed our housing system 10 years ago. So I don't trust that market much anymore. And I'm wondering why we're still pursuing policies that share responsibility for a basic human right with profit-driven entities. I'm wondering why we are. I know Cian O'Callaghan brought this up in the Dáil this week. I don't understand why we're still, for people buying homes, I don't understand why we're, rather than developing our social housing and rather than giving social housing to local authority, the state is continuing to rent at interest to these cuckoo funds, to these vulture funds, to regular to housing investors, rather than investing in the long-term residential needs of people. I know that one thing that the Social Democrats are passionate about doing is outlawing vulture funds. And that's actually pretty pertinent to the story of to our local rep, Carly. She lost her home to a vulture fund. And I just, when you compare that to the amount of government TDs who are themselves landlords and have a kind of vested interest in making a profit from the legislation passed, you really have to wonder, does this government have the kind of the best interests of young people at heart? I think to kind of go be kind of proactive about this and how we can offer a solution, we need to not only invest more in housing, because that's obviously the easy answer. We need to increase the supply of affordable housing by removing essentially the kind of the complex bit of this is with these cuckoo funds buying up places, with Airbnb companies buying up places, that creation of increased demand is what's driving up the price of rent, and is meaning that I'm spending a third or almost half of my wage just having a roof over my head. So this government and this country in general needs to be far more driven in getting profit and investment out of what should be a human right in housing.
Okay, Vanessa, I just want to ask you next. Like when you hear John's points there as well, and the statistics and the articles today about the cuckoo funds kind of buying up properties, how are, I say young people, how are we supposed to compete in that, and like what solutions are there even?
Like I watched prime time on Tuesday, and then I watched prime time last night, and I was just like, whew, like when my mind just felt like exploding, because like a quote from that, like somebody was like, I'm literally locked out of that housing estate because they bought it all up, and they're like, we wanted one of them, like we've lived in this community. And I actually just, when I heard it, I was like, wow, there was no words for that. But I think like the Greens policy, like they've always kind of started being pushing cost rental, and cost rental is about building more homes for people, and building more homes on like public houses on public land, and like you'd hope that like that would be provide a path for people to then have a house. But I mean, I still live at home as well, and when you hear the stats and you see the figures, you're kind of like, is there a way out? Will I ever, will there ever be that possibility? I really think that we can't lose hope, because if we lose hope, we'll kind of go down that spiral of not having faith in. But I do think that things need to change. A lot of things need to change. But at the minute, it is pretty desperate. I don't have any more words other than it's pretty grim, and that's awful to say. But from listening to the stats and listening to prime time, it's just like, wow. And that, and people are blaming it now on COVID because houses couldn't get built, and things couldn't happen. But I feel like COVID is just going to get the blame for everything, and I don't think I don't think that's it. It just
yeah. No, I think when you look at the number of dwellings completed last year, it was 20,000, just over 20,000. I think it was 20,600 or something like that. And the year before, 2019, nothing to do with COVID, it was just over 21,000. Adam, I want to ask you about this. What I suppose, what are your thoughts on the house situation? And like, this is clearly a legacy problem as well with the government.
Yeah, 100%. I think there's 2 points, and I know Fianna Fáil does have the housing minister with Darragh O'Brien at the moment, and Fianna Fáil are known for that party to build the houses. We do still need to look at it at a big issue. I'm sitting here still living at home in Fettercairn, and I'm sure we all are sitting here going, will I ever be able to move out? At what age will I be able to move out? Will I ever be able to own my own home? And that's a question that I think every young person still has at the moment, and that's something that it just shows how much of a big issue it is. I think there's a couple of things that need to be looked at to help with the housing market. Obviously, the social housing definitely needs to be looked at. But one of the bigger ones, the amount of social houses that are sitting boarded up. I know myself, literally right across the road from my house, 2 doors down. Yeah, Hayden, there's two. There's loads.
2 houses right across from your house, isn't there? 2 houses.
Yeah. 2 houses. But one of them was only done a couple of weeks ago.
Just so everyone, we live in the same estate.
But like that, there's houses boarded up constantly right across Fettercairn, right across Jobestown, right across everywhere at this point. And we need to look and see, why are they being left boarded up for so long? Are they privately owned houses? Are they council houses, which I presume most of them are? I know in last year, in 2020, I think there was 6,000 in just 6 months from the government, Fianna Fáil going into government, there was 6,000 boarded up houses put back into home ownership. People living in those houses in Dublin Southwest, as far as I know. I think that's something that we need to look at, and it needs to be improved a lot more, because as myself and Hayden can see, constantly boarded up houses all the time in the estates. I think that's an issue that I think there was a statistic from Limerick a couple of last year that there was the same amount of boarded up houses as there was homeless people on the streets of Limerick City one the nights. There was the exact same amount of people, so all of them could have been in a house if these boarded up houses weren't boarded up. And look at why it's taken so long for those houses to be put back into. Why isn't it done in a week, 2 weeks? Why isn't there not a system to get them back up and running?
I think there's an answer to that, though, and I think that is because of the issues of investors having an interest in these houses and them leasing it back to the local authorities who don't own them. Because the local authorities don't own them, they have no incentive to refurbish it. They have no incentive to make sure that it's open and accessible and ready to come in. And that's where I think it's so important to get the influence of investors out of the housing market. I think as well, we need to talk about what affordable housing means. I mean, Dara O'Brien, the figures that he was putting out this week were 450,000 for an affordable house, in which I think you and your partner have to be earning about 90 grand a year to kind of make ends meet. I don't know how many people you guys know our age or within 10 years of us who are making 90 grand a year, and definitely outside of the people who work for who are, I don't know, working in McCann Fitzgerald or something like that. I don't know how many people with ordinary jobs are going to be able to afford those kind of houses. So I don't think that the current solutions being proposed are addressing the problem at all.
I think that it's. I know, obviously, like the three of you are obviously involved in politics in some capacity, and it's very hard to kind of come up with solutions that I know even for like even local councillors and stuff like that. It is very, very difficult. Like their powers are so limited nowadays as well. In certain things, when you hear about things like on board Planala and just the fast track system, it kind of just bypasses a lot of what councillors are meant to do. But look, as I mentioned, this is the last question I want to ask the three of you. When you consider everything that we've spoken about today, housing, employment, education, like the legacy issues, I want to come to you again, John, just because you were the last person I was talking to. Do you feel that there is a feeling there that this is going to just lead to mass immigration again of young people? And I suppose just what is keeping you here in Ireland?
I hope not. I hope that this doesn't lead to mass immigration. I certainly wouldn't blame anyone for pursuing better opportunities abroad. The reason I'm staying here at the moment is because I'm lucky to have a good job, and I'm lucky to have a good support system in place. I know that isn't important. That isn't in place for everybody else. I think just we as, not as a country, because I think that the nation and the people have always tried to make Ireland a good place to live in. But I think that the state, I think the parties that govern in future should be ones that are invested in making this a good place for the average person on the street to live in, not a select few who get the lucky breaks, because quality of life shouldn't depend on luck.
Okay. Adam, just to ask you the same question, do you think that it's leading to some sort of mass immigration again with Irish people? Like you hear about the percentages there, like people are frustrated, they're living at home, if the access to education is limited, and when you do go, the options for employment is limited. Like, what is keeping you here in Ireland? And I suppose, and do you think that's going that way?
It is something that I have looked at. I know myself, like within the industry and going into the baking industry, thankfully it has gone and built back up in the last 5, 6, 7 years, and it is growing even now during COVID. I know in my place it's been a 30% increase in sales within the bakery products. And looking at that, it is growing, and I think it's beneficial for me. But there is still so many other areas that it's not, and realistically, people are going to start emigrating. People are going to want to, they're going to say they're going to go for a year, get a bit of travel in, get a bit of work, and they're not going to come back. They'll realize how good it is. Me personally, I don't think I will. I don't think I would emigrate. I like Ireland too much, and I like the community I live in, and just stay kind of helping out locally. I think it's something that's very important for me anyway. And trying to improve the area we are in, and trying to improve those types of markets, I think is definitely something we do need to look at, because emigration probably realistically will happen over the next couple of years.
And like, obviously, like we were watching Reeling in the Years even recently, and like you're just seeing the devastation of emigration, and like people are sad leaving the airport, and you just like going to the airport to leave, and you just don't know if they'll ever come back. And Vanessa, just to ask you then, like, do you think that we're heading towards something like that again? And I know it seems like a very kind of vague question, like what's keeping you here in Ireland? Obviously, because it's your home. That's what's going to keep you here. But when you consider everything that we've talked about, I suppose, what is keeping you here?
Well, I hope like people are going to emigrate anyway. You know, people are going to. That's going to happen because people think that there is a better quality of life outside of Ireland. But as you said there about Reeling in the Years, and it's scary that I can actually remember what happens. But like we saw people leaving and we saw that devastation. But I really hope that people do stay here, and kind of like there are opportunities, you know, and there are things available to people. And I hope that people can see that, and I hope that, you know, we as a country can help people see that. Do you know that there is lots of good reasons to stay in Ireland. Me myself, I've never really thought about emigrating. I like living here. I've had a lot of opportunities growing up. I think I've been very lucky. But I think people are going to leave, and that is it. But I think that when you see people coming home, like when we were locking the country down, you know, and the joy on people's faces when they were coming home, and when they come home for Christmas, you know, so there's always that little bit of Irish still in them, you know, that they always come home, you know, so yeah. there is always something here for them, like they come back to their roots eventually. And I think that we need to like be open to that as well, that people leave but they'll come back because this is their home essentially.
I suppose it's just sad the fact that people feel like they have to leave. I think that's just what's the worst thing about it. I think I'd just like to say I'm very happy with the points that we discussed today, and I hope you all felt that you all had an equal opportunity to speak. And I am really appreciative for your time. So to say, Adam Smyth, Vanessa Mulhall, and John Kerr, thanks so much for coming on Local Voices this week.
Thank you.
Hayden.
Thank you for listening to and watching Local Voices. If you haven't already, be sure to follow the show on your streaming platform of choice or subscribe on YouTube to never miss a minute.